Welcome to another exciting and a very special episode of Women in the Making, a show that brings stories of extraordinary women who fought against all odds to forge their own path. Serena Williams said, "I really think a champion is defined not by their wins, but by how they can recover when they fall." My guest today has emerged not only as a survivor, but as a formidable force for change. Her journey embodies the indomitable spirit that dwells in each of us, reminding us that even amidst the darkest hours, we possess the strength to rise, rebuild, and rewrite our own narratives. She is a woman who defied all odds, fought through depths of injustice, and turned her pain into purpose. From wrongful conviction to a voice of empowerment, please help me in welcoming Amanda Knox. Amanda, your family is growing.
Yeah.
You just had a second baby.
Yes.
Between sleepless nights, diaper changes, hormonal imbalances, I'm so fortunate that you actually decided to come on the show and spend a little time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to support some local women.
My first question to you is, while growing up, your parents were separated, but at the same time, they made it a point that you guys lived close enough. You grew up with a lot of compassion, a lot of love. Tell me a little bit about that young Amanda while growing up, how she was, what did she like, and how did she end up earning the values from her parents?
That's a really great question. I grew up with a divorced household, but also with my entire extended family within walking distance. And so it really felt like I was in a very safe environment, and it was very normal for me to go like, oh, my dad has a house and my aunt has a house and my grandma has a house, and they're all right here. And I could bike ride, I could walk to everyone's houses. I walked my dog. And I think the biggest thing that I had growing up was that feeling of safety, this feeling of belonging, this feeling of being a part of something that was bigger than me, but that cared for me. And so I really did develop in a space, and I'm sure this has impacted me mentally for the better, especially when I had my various troubles along the way, was this feeling of like, no, like, I don't live in a dangerous world that's out to get me. I very much live in a world where people love each other and support each other, and that's just how the world works. At the same time, I also grew up with this like very intuitive sense that there are lots of ways to be in the world. There isn't just one way of being, because even just the difference between my mom's house and my dad's house culturally, like my dad is like Mr. All-American, like hot dogs and hamburger helper. And my mom is like very German, and she was born in Germany. And so we were having like Rouladen and Zwetschgenknödel and that kind of like lifestyle at my mom's house. And so it made me really appreciate that the world is big, it's diverse, it's supportive, and I think in some ways it set me up to be vulnerable, to be exploited, and in other ways it set me up to be really resilient in the face of tragedy and exploitation.
Yeah, and you had a beautiful connection with your sisters.
Three sisters. Close? Actually, I have a tattoo here.
Oh, I love that.
We all have the same tattoo. So I'm the first of four, and all of us have the appropriate box checked in.
I've never seen something like that. So I really like that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So your upbringing and your values were very important to you while growing up. And then you decided to move to Italy and, go to a foreign land, study abroad. A lot of people from India as well do the same.
Yeah.
So coming abroad for a higher education is not something that's unheard of. How did you just choose this little town? What made you really think of the entire Italy? That was the place. I know you talk a lot about learning languages, and that's going to be another question. How many languages do you really know?
Oh, yeah. How many am I actually fluent in is just two, English and Italian. However, I can get by with some German, and I used to study both Latin and Japanese. So there are lots of different ways to be in the world, and language is an amazing bridge bridge in order to make connections with people who
Sure.
are coming from different places. So that was something that I really loved and I really wanted in my life. Like I imagined myself as I got older that I wanted to be a bridge builder across the divide of languages. And then my Oma was very keen on me studying abroad in Europe. My family visited, my entire extended family all went to Italy together, and we fell in love with the place. My mom was, reading things like Under the Tuscan Sun. And so like she was very, very positive about me going and studying abroad in Italy. And I ultimately decided to go to Perugia because there was a program there. Like here in Seattle, we have a sister city program with Perugia, Italy. And Perugia struck me as like the perfect ideal place to study abroad because it's not the Rome, it's not Florence, it's not these places where you see like floods of students coming in that are all speaking English. This is, as far as I knew going into it, was a small town that was more historic.
Sure.
And all these like tiny towns on hills. And I remember like when I was there, one of the really fun experiences that I had while I was there was going on this peace walk, which was a walk from Perugia to Assisi. And it took all day, but it was just people, like students.
It takes like an entire day.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how fast you're walking, but like this whole parade of people would march from Perugia to Assisi, and just to celebrate peace. And there were people playing guitars, and it was just gorgeous and beautiful. And it was really fun to feel again like a part of something really positive.
Love that.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah.
So you land up in Perugia, and you were 20 years old.
20 years old. Yeah.
And it was literally just 5 weeks that the entire episode started turning against you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was 5 really glorious weeks of living with 3 wonderful roommates and going to classes. And then Meredith was murdered, and it came out of the blue. No one anticipated it. And I came home and found my world, which was very small, a crime scene, and called the cops, and everything happened from there.
Your world turned upside down within 5 weeks of landing into Italy. Tell me about the moment where you realized that something has happened, because we all have been there as a young 20-year-old, and maybe somebody's watching it right now. I want to know from you, because sometimes you're naive, sometimes you're ignorant, and sometimes you just don't know what's happening. And I guess you were also part of all of that when nobody reflected back on the fact that you lost a friend.
Thank
you
you for
lost a
saying
roommate, and you didn't even get time to mourn for her, meet her family, or even get connected, because that must be going on in your mind. I was living with this woman. I spent time with her. I partied with her. And those are the friends that stay with you for life.
Yeah.
The school and college friends. And you never even got the chance to think, reflect, or work upon any of that.
Thank you for saying that, because not a lot of people remember that like, of all of my roommates, Meredith was the one who was most like me, right? Like my other 2 roommates were these Italian girls that were several years older than us. Meredith was just a year older than me. She also was studying abroad. She also spoke English as a first language. So we had a lot more in common, and we ended up doing a lot more things together. And, like I remember she brought back cookies from when she visited, and we would sit there eating cookies together while drinking espresso. And she, like, these little moments where she was just like, how can you eat just one cookie? I could never like stop eating all of the cookies, and just like little things like that, where I think, if things had gone the way normal study abroad experiences go, like she would be somebody that I would be in contact with to this day. And like, I would very likely have gone to England to visit her, and she would have shown me the sights, because she used to be like a tour guide. And so, yeah, and one of the really sad things from this experience is like not a lot of people remember that I lost a friend.
Yes.
And I didn't know her for a million years, but
sometimes you don't need to know somebody for very long.
yeah.
It just takes a couple days. Just like I guess you met Raphael.
Yeah. Like,
right?
especially when
It
you're
just
in those
happens
new
in the
situations, like you're studying abroad and all the people that you meet are suddenly like your people because
Yes.
you don't have anybody else. And that's really how it felt. So yeah, I came home. I was planning on going away for the weekend with this young guy that I had just met named Raffaele. He was going to take me to this local village that sold truffles. And all my intention was that morning was to go home, take a shower, get a change of clothes, get a bag of a few
Absolutely.
belongings. And I came home and discovered, I didn't walk into a bloody crime scene, right? And on the one hand, like, thank goodness, because I never had to actually in person witness that. But on the other hand, I got a little bit screwed because I came home and yes, my house was a crime scene, but I didn't really know what I was looking at. Things were off.
Absolutely.
The front door was open. There were things that were not where they should have been. But at no point did I think, oh, of course, one of my roommates has been murdered.
No.
Like, it was not like everything. That was the farthest thing from my mind. And so I didn't really know how to react.
And people were asking you questions about, hey, why do you have to take a shower in your home? I'm a girl. And I just met this guy. I mean, truly, I would like to take a shower, let me tell you, in my own shower. I would not want to use a guy's shower. So I was even angry at people considering that as an option. I mean, I don't know. It just was very odd for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I just went about what my normal business was going to be. When I saw things that were off, I called for help.
Yes.
And I didn't really know, even when they broke down Meredith's door and discovered her body there, again, I did not witness it myself. Everyone starts screaming in Italian. I have no idea what's going on. And just the shock of hearing there's a body, like nothing in my life had ever prepared me for a situation like that. And again, like, I grew up in this like safe environment. I was not familiar with these kinds of crimes. The worst thing that I thought would happen to me when I went to Italy was someone would steal my passport or I would get sick. And it seemed totally random.
Absolutely.
Like, it wasn't, some dark alleyway. It was her own bedroom. So I didn't even know how to dial 911 in Italy. It's not 911. Like, I had to go ask Raffaele in order to dial 911 for me. Like, it was, I was unprepared. But I think unprepared, like so many people who study abroad, would be unprepared.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think my last question in this segment would be, the moment you got to know Meredith was inside and was murdered, what went into your mind at that moment?
Well, honestly, like, I went through a moment of kind of disbelief. Like, I couldn't believe it. And then selfishly, I thought, oh my God, thank God I'm alive, because it was just a fluke that I met a young guy, a few days before, and that I slept over at his house. Like, I thought that could have been me. And I dearly hoped that there had been a mistake. But then immediately my mind went to, who could possibly have done this? Because truly,
absolutely,
it's maybe because I was biased towards thinking that places are safe. But when I was in Perugia, it didn't feel like there were murderers around.
Absolutely.
And so, again, I wanted to know how, I wanted to know why, I wanted to know who, and I wanted to help.
Yeah. And so many times I feel adversity does not define us. It only brings the strength and character that's within us. And you've portrayed that multiple times. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks.
Amanda, The pretrial media demonized and scrutinized you, portrayed you as this horrifying person who is capable of a crime, of committing something so violent, so cruel. And how did that affect your case and your character assassination in face of public?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So I was arrested, right, in November of, November of 2007.
2007, yeah.
And I didn't actually like face, any sort of legal entity that would decide whether or not I was going to go on to trial until a year later. So in that intervening time, basically all of 2008, where I was awaiting trial, the media was going nuts.
Yes.
And very, very early on, there was only what the prosecution had to say. And in large part, that was because my family was completely unprepared to engage with like international media that was just descending upon this case, and people calling them out of the blue, trying to get like information from them, anyone that they could talk to, reaching out to their employers, all of that. Like it was a circus. And at the very beginning, they didn't know what to say. They didn't know if they should say anything. My lawyers told them that we needed to stay away from the media. And so it was really just the prosecution's word and anybody who had any wild speculation about the case. And so what that meant was I went from being an anonymous college student to one of the most globally hated women ever. And it all was revolving because Meredith had been sexually assaulted and murdered. It sort of evolved around this idea of me being this sex-obsessed, violent femme fatale who orchestrated an orgy of death, is the story that just went out there. And it was, on the one hand, it was so utterly absurd that a part of me, as I was just waiting even to have my chance to have my say in court, a part of me was like, okay, the adults in the room are going to realize that this is nuts, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is crazy. This is just
a misunderstanding.
It's a misunderstanding. It's the media, it's the tabloid press that are just making a meal out of it, and they're just profiting off of the most scandalous story that they can come up with. And this is a story that's way bigger than me. So it, like when I have finally have my day in court, people are going to see that I'm not this crazy person. But what I didn't anticipate was that fantasy that the prosecution came up with was so captivating to people, and it anchored them. People had that bias. As soon as they hear that's the first story that they hear, that first impression leaves a mark. And so even when the trial was going on eventually after a year, people were going, okay, well, we've been hearing about all this evidence and we've been hearing about this crazy psychopath, and there's got to be something to it, right? Like there's no smoke without fire. Like even if there's no evidence of it, like they didn't just make it up. And that was the problem, is it was all made up. And how do you prove a negative? Like I went from this, again, anonymous person, and I was 20 years old. It's not like I had this like long history of
criminal violence against you.
Of criminal violence, or of even like anything. Like I was literally just a nobody. And so I was this blank slate onto which people could project all of these like fears and fantasies. And it was really hard, especially again as like a 20-year-old person, to say like I knew this was not who I was, but like how do I convey who I am? I'm a student. Like I've smoked pot a few times and I've had sex a few times, but I'm not a maniac, I swear. Like that, it felt like I was one tiny, tiny voice in this chorus of voices that was saying who I was and what I had done. And ultimately, what it all came down to was whether or not the truth mattered or the story.
True.
And I always thought and believed that the truth mattered and would matter, and that, again, the adults in the room would figure it out. And when that guilty verdict was handed down, I realized that that wasn't the case. And that it really was the story that mattered to people more than the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. They called you names like Foxy Noxy.
Yeah.
How did that really start erupting? Because it was spreading like wildfire.
Yeah. And to be fair, this was all something that my family had to grapple with, more so even than me, because I was sitting in a prison cell most of this time and I didn't have access to the international media. My mom would come in and tell me, like, this thing has gotten way out of control. It's way bigger than any of us.
And you were allowed visits from them?
I was allowed visits from my family. I had 6 hours of visitation a month.
Okay.
So when they came, and they were allowed to write me letters, they would sometimes explain to me how big and scary this thing was happening outside of there. And, you know, I saw it when I went into the courtroom, all these cameras and people with, you know, taking photos of me and yelling out questions at me. So I got glimpses of it. I saw it in at least the Italian news. It was constantly in the Italian news, and it wasn't just Italian news. It was talk shows, and it was like, you know, people who were psychics were talking about it and saying that they could read into my mind. Like, it was bizarre. But, you know, what they did was they found things like my Foxy Noxy. That was a soccer nickname, but it was twisted and turned into this, to mean this like cunning, sexually, you know, charged femme fatale character. And that's not at all what that nickname that I got when I was like a 13-year-old playing soccer meant to me or to any of the people who actually used that nickname with me. And it was, again, like a childhood nickname. So to be turned into this caricature of a woman that was deeply, deeply misogynist in nature anyway. Like, just the character of Foxy Noxy is absurd. It is a male sex fantasy.
Absolutely.
That is not what any real human being is actually like. I, again, really believed as I was going through my trial that people would see through it, and that, yeah, there's a lot of people talking a lot of crazy nonsense, but when it all comes down to it, what does the evidence say, and what does my character say? And one of the most frustrating things that I heard in the courtroom is, here I am arriving at court day after day. I'm not this like crazy femme fatale person. I'm sitting down quietly. I'm participating. I'm respectfully addressing the court. And at a certain point, one of the attorneys for the prosecution said that clearly prison was good for me.
Wow.
Because I was so well behaved in court, and prison must have had a good influence on me.
That is unbelievable.
I was shocked.
Absolutely. This is really shocking.
Well, and it goes to show that his bias, right? Like, this person truly believed, or at least pretended to believe, that I was a bad person. Now there was evidence of me being a good, well-behaved person. So something had to happen in the interim, and it must be prison, because that's the thing that he was asking for more of for me. So it just reconfirmed all of his expectations and his beliefs and justified what he was doing in asking me to be sentenced to life in prison. And at no point did he ever pause to consider, oh, maybe, just maybe, this is actually evidence that I'm wrong. And that's one of the biggest things that I've taken away from this experience, is like how much people are inclined to view reality in the way that is fit for them.
Absolutely.
That proves them right. And how rare it is for someone to really, really imagine that they could be wrong about something.
I would not even want to see another woman getting abused at the slightest level. I have seen so many violent crime stories, true crime stories, horror crime stories. I've never seen anything that a woman is enjoying seeing another women molested.
No,
I
you'd
don't
have to
think
be a psychopath, and
you really
like,
have to be
yeah,
into a different frame of mind and thinking of you as that person just because they thought there was something about your eyes.
I know the eyes
And
thing.
I'm like, aren't they gorgeous?
Oh,
You
thanks.
make this person
Are they?
into-
Am I awake? Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Again, like I think that one of the reasons why this story just got picked up around the world was because it played into those ideas of extremes. It wasn't the same old story of a robber breaks into a home and, you know, assaults and murders a young woman. That story is so common that it's boring and it doesn't sell papers. But the story of a psychopathic female who sadistically murders her friend, now that is rare, that is exceptional, and that sells papers.
Yeah, that's the tabloids' way of just capturing attention around the world. And it did. It did justice to what they really wanted to prove, but not for you.
Yeah.
Tell me, how can you describe the challenges you faced during the trial and your constant impact and your determination to prove your innocence?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges in the courtroom was having to have the patience to sit there while for hours a day, for days on end. The trial lasted almost a year entirely, and I was going in multiple days a week and just sit there while people described how I would have killed my friend. Like I had to sit there and listen to that. I had to sit there and watch a judge and a jury listen to that, knowing that those people who had no idea who I was were going to decide what my life was going to be.
Yeah.
And sure, there were moments where I could stand up and make a statement, but like I knew going in that people weren't really going to listen to me. I was being interrogated and people weren't listening to me. And so by the time I arrived at the courtroom, I knew that people weren't actually listening to me. So really it was the pain of feeling like I had no voice, that no one trusted me ever. And so anything I did say was going to be seen through the worst possible lens. People were going to assume that I was lying. No matter how much I opened my heart to people, they would assume that it was a front, that it was fake. And so what can I possibly say? It was utterly debilitating because and again, it was, people would criticize me for anything that I did. If I cried, they criticized me and said I was fake crying. If I didn't cry, they said I was cold-hearted and I didn't have feelings. If I said something, they were like, look at her, she's trying to get attention. If I didn't say something, they'd say, look at her, she's hiding something. Everything I did was seen through the worst possible light. Even just what I was wearing. Did I come into the courtroom with my hair brushed that day? People, I heard comments about how I didn't look, professional enough coming into the courtroom. And it's like, I just came from a prison cell.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Obsession around every single feature of yours that was depicted in the tabloids.
Yep. And that's fixation on me as if I had all the answers. When I didn't have all the answers at all. I didn't know who killed my friend.
Yes.
I wasn't there that night. If I had the answers, I would have wanted to give it to them just so I wouldn't have to go through the torture of having to sit there and be looked at and scrutinized and treated as if I had all the answers and I was withholding them. And I wanted to know why my friend had been murdered too. And I didn't know.
Right.
And so I think that was the hard part. And just the endless waiting and watching my family just go through hell to try to support me while we were all waiting and waiting to know if our lives were going to be okay again. So
I know you gathered a lot of attention from the European media, but tell me about the American media. Did it grasp the similar attention, or you were actually getting support from any international level?
Well, my parents would be able to speak better to how that transitioned, because I know that there was a big transition. At the very, very beginning, it was just all bad, everything bad, no matter where you were. But then I think it was during the actual trial when witnesses are being questioned by the court, expert witnesses are coming in and talking about the DNA, that especially some journalists in the US started saying, wait a second, we were promised all this evidence. We were promised this femme fatale. Where is it? Because we're not seeing it. And that's when the tides started shifting. Now, of course, I was eventually convicted. So it didn't shift enough. But it was enough that by the time I was convicted, there was already a strong contingent of people who said, this doesn't add up and we need to do something about it. And I'm honestly, I have to be...
And were these local people, or are you talking about somebody from the States?
Interestingly, there were a few journalists in Italy, but like
Very
2 or 3, maybe. And then there was a number in the US that started asking good investigative journalistic questions about the evidence, and started pursuing the idea that I could actually be innocent and not involved in this crime at all. And I think that's what people really didn't want to believe, that like I couldn't have been involved at all. I think some people at the beginning thought, well, she was probably involved somehow, but maybe she's not that like knife wieldy femme fatale that they were saying, but she maybe knows something and is hiding it. But then I think people really started to think, I don't see any evidence of her actually being there when this crime happened. Like, is it possible that this is literally just a young girl who was thrown in jail for nothing? And I think people really, really resisted that idea because of how scary that idea is. Like the idea that just a police officer will throw an innocent person who has nothing to do with a crime into jail and pursue a case against them for years. Like that's a very scary idea. We like to think that we have more sense than that. We're more civilized than that.
True.
And when that was slowly becoming more apparent to people, I think it started here in the US and then it sort of spread.
Amanda, I wanted to know from you, your first day behind bars. I don't think I've heard that. We see that on movies, on television. You're stripped naked. You don't want to be stripped naked even in front of a third person. You were only 20 years old. That moment when these women are taking you to jail, tell me about what was going on in your mind at that particular time.
Yeah, that was obviously a very bad day. I was stripped naked at the police office. Even they had me stripped naked, and I was examined by a male doctor.
Is that legal?
I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, they wanted to take pictures of my body to see if there was evidence of me having participated in this horrible struggle that, as Meredith fought for her life. They were examining my genitals. They were doing all of that. And then I was brought to the jail, and I had to sit there and do a mug shot. And here's how clueless I was about the situation. I didn't know if I was supposed to smile.
I was just going to ask.
They were like, okay, ready to take your picture. And I was like, should I be smiling? And they were like, no. And I was like, oh. And I had never not smiled when somebody took my picture before.
Sure.
It was so disconcerting. And it just, because I didn't know that I was even a suspect at that point. Like, yes, they had arrested me, and yes, they had stripped me naked, and yes, they had taken me to jail. But what they told me was that I was a witness. and that I was being taken somewhere safe for my protection. And so I didn't understand even that I was being accused of this crime. So I was brought to this prison, not knowing what it was. I thought it looked like an insane asylum, just from when I was finally taken out of the car and brought indoors. It looked like a mental institution to me. And I was brought down what I thought was a completely empty corridor that because I didn't see anybody there and all the doors were closed. And they brought me to a cell at the very end of the block and brought me inside, and it was a very spare room. There was a bed, like a steel bed frame, this foam mattress. There were some mounted cabinets on the wall and something mounted on a shelf higher up that was wrapped in a plastic bag, like a black plastic bag, like a garbage bag. And that was it. Like that was it. And they gave me a wool blanket and left me there. And I spent the first whole day, the first several days in prison in complete solitary confinement. I had no idea what was going on. I couldn't talk to anybody. I was just sitting alone in a cell.
Isn't solitary confinement for like the strictest of criminals?
Yes, they were
And
putting
you still
me.
had to go through that.
Yes, I was put under strict solitary confinement, and I had no access to the outside world. They didn't want me to know what was happening. And it wasn't until I was brought before a judge a few days later that I even learned that I was being accused of this crime. So my first day in prison is probably different than a lot of people's first day in prison because I didn't even know that was what was happening to me. All I knew is I was brought into this very, very spare environment, and I had people barking orders at me to be silent and to not talk to anybody. And there was no one else with me. I was just alone in a room.
So in that darkest hours, somebody talks about that in the darkest hours and then their darkest moments, you find some light. But you were still put behind the darkest cell. Did you ever think there was going to be a light or a ray of hope anywhere?
At that point, I really was, I didn't know how much trouble I was in. It wasn't until even years later that I really fully grasped like how bad the situation was. In those moments when I was in the cell, that first cell and in solitary confinement, I thought it was all just a big misunderstanding. And I thought that, I thought that the adults would figure it out. And that I would go home. And the thing that I was thinking about the most in those moments was how much I wanted to talk to my mom, because my mom was on her way to Italy. She arrived in Italy the morning that I was arrested. And I was afraid that since they had taken my phone away from me, she would be calling me and I wouldn't be answering. And she would think that I was dead. And so the thing I was worried about was my mom freaking out and thinking that I was dead. And I was like so panicked that I couldn't communicate with her. And again, it wasn't until I was brought before a judge that I actually was given access to even an attorney. And that attorney let me know that he had been in contact with my mom and that she would see me soon. But that's the first that I knew. And so in those days that I was stuck in solitary confinement, I wasn't really thinking about being accused of a crime because I still didn't really know that that's what was happening. I was thinking about my mom and how much I needed my mom and how much she needed me.
Totally. I can totally imagine. And tell me a little bit about how did eventually the 4 years passed for you? I don't want you to shed every single moment because I know it's going to be really hard for you. But tell me about the time when you knew there's some justice coming your way.
So the first 2 years of my imprisonment was in the lead up to being convicted. And I would say that those 2 years were a very different psychological experience for me than the next 2 years, which were after I was convicted and sentenced to 26 years in prison. So in those first 2 years, I slowly came to realize that I was accused, that I was being investigated, that this trial was going on. And I maintained this sense of optimism because I believed that the truth would win out. And so what I felt like I was experiencing was this limbo space. Like I was just waiting to be given my life again. I was sort of living someone else's life by mistake. And I just had to wait patiently to be given my life back. And it was hard. Like this prison is not an easy environment to survive in. It was extremely challenging, but I always felt like I didn't belong there and that the place that I belonged was outside. And so it really was just, I didn't have to like accept that this was my reality. It was more like, how do I just get through this until the day comes that I can go home to where I belong? After I was convicted, though, everything changed because I had no faith anymore. I had no reason to believe that things would work out. And I was hit with this huge existential crisis that this was my life, that I was not living somebody else's life by mistake. And I had to figure out if I could live this life. And if so, how? If I could live the life of a prisoner, if I could live the life of a wrongly imprisoned person, and a person who was losing everything that I thought that I could count on in life, like the opportunity to have a career and a family and to be a mother.
Absolutely.
That was one of the hardest things that I suddenly had taken from me, was the idea, like, if I got out of prison, it would be in my late 40s. And I would be a broken, bereft person. Like, I was not going to be able to have a family. And I had to, on a day-to-day basis, consciously choose to live and decide how I was going to be, who I was going to be. And it's not like I had these great aspirations. Like, I had a very limited environment and I had limited possibilities.
You were still exploring the world. That was your time to explore the world.
Yeah.
I heard you in one of your podcasts where you said you did not want to think about what future holds, but you wanted to take it one day at a time in the prison.
Yeah.
And you had your books, you did your sit-ups, and you focused on probably creating some positive energy around you.
Yeah.
How difficult was that to think as a 20-year-old trying to do something and still stay positive in that tough environment?
Well, staying positive is a strong way of phrasing what I was doing, because I was still very, very sad. And in fact, when I tried talking about how I was feeling when I was going through this, my mom was really, really worried that I was deeply, deeply depressed because I was very sad. I woke up sad. I spent the whole day sad. I went to bed sad. However, I had to acknowledge my sadness as a part of my reality now. I couldn't just pretend that it wasn't there. And in a way, it's not like there's a difference between embracing reality and indulging in it. And I embraced the fact that I had sadness in me. I had grief, I had loss that I was continually processing day by day. Allowing myself to feel that opened me up to the opportunity to then do something about it. And you're right. I spent most of my days just thinking about one day at a time, because the prospect of giving my life meaning in that environment over the course of decades was overwhelming for me. I could not figure out how to do that, especially because I was only 2 decades old at the time.
Yes.
So like, I didn't have enough life experience to understand how you make meaning in a day-to-day basis that lasts in the long term. So instead, I simply focused on what I could manage, which was one day at a time. I knew that I could get from waking up to going to bed and feel like I had accomplished something, even if it was something very small, but meaningful to me. And that could have been sit-ups. That could have been writing a letter to my mom. That could have been helping a new prisoner get acclimated. It was little things like that that were just enough for one day. And then tomorrow I'd deal with it when it came to it. But like today was what mattered. And in a way, again, it's like this weird bittersweet thing because in reality, we all just have today.
True.
We don't have tomorrow. We don't have next year. We just have right now. So how can I right now be the best person that I can be? I'll deal with the next hour. Right now, can I be present? Can I be my best self? And if I can't, can I forgive myself?
Yeah, there's a very famous quote by Oprah Winfrey. I don't want to say it incorrectly, but she says that the way you live in the present moment defines how you're going to spend the next moment that's going to come up. And that's so valid and so true to you. So thank you for sharing this journey with us.
Yeah.
Amanda, eventually you were acquitted by the highest courts in Italy. And take us back to that moment of happiness, relief, feeling proud, being with your family, getting your voice back, getting your life back. How did it feel?
Relief, absolutely. Like I went into that courtroom not knowing what to expect, not having necessarily faith that it was going to work out. And then to be told that I was going home, like a huge amount of relief washed through me. But I knew that I wasn't going home because I wasn't going back to being an anonymous college student.
You cannot get your life back.
Yeah, it was a part of me deeply, deeply hoped that I would get to go home and there would be some media hullabaloo, but ultimately they would, get their fix and then they'd leave me alone. A part of me very naively thought that was going to be true and that I would get to go back to being me and having my life. But very, very quickly, I realized that was not the case, that the world had changed around me, that Amanda Knox was now a name that people associated certain ideas with. It was not just my name. It didn't just belong to me anymore. And my identity, my face, my name had meaning in other people's lives in ways that I didn't have control over, but that were going to then be reflected upon me. And I couldn't, all the dreams of what my life could be and would be prior to all of this happening had to adjust because that there was not space for me to be an anonymous person anymore.
True.
So then I was suddenly thrown into this complex drama of, well, then who am I? Now what? What do I even belong to the world? There was a long time where I felt like I didn't belong because I was acquitted, but then I was put back on trial again and I was convicted again. And then I was acquitted ultimately. So this whole legal saga took 8 years, even though 4 of them I spent in prison, 4 of them I spent in freedom, waiting to potentially be extradited and feeling like there was not a place for me. Like I didn't belong to the rest of humanity the way that other people did. I was isolated. I was different. I was a monster in people's eyes, or at the very least, I wasn't like them.
You could never be unnoticed.
Exactly. And given that, what can I be? I tried hiding. Like I worked in this bookshop that was literally underground. And I tried to be invisible. I tried to be anonymous. It didn't work. So then I thought, what else can I be? What else is the world calling me to be? And the thing that I found myself noticing was that it wasn't just me that was being judged and treated like not a human like everyone else. In fact, what was happening to me was kind of an exaggerated version of what we all do to each other all the time, which is sit in judgment and accuse each other of our own faults and talk past each other and purposefully misunderstand each other. And especially with women, vilify each other through sexuality, or having people vilify us through our sexuality. And so I started to consider, can I have a voice in a space can I offer a perspective that I have won the hard way, that I've earned the hard way, about what's wrong with the way that we treat each other and with the way that we think about each other and talk to each other. And so I started working in that kind of space, in the journalism space.
And how did your experience change your perspective on the justice system?
Well, to be honest, I didn't really have a perspective on the justice system prior to all this happening. I never really had to. Like, I grew up in the suburbs. I didn't have a lawyer, but I also was privileged enough where I didn't have to think about, like, I grew up in a safe place where crime was not a thing that happened. It wasn't something that happened to me or that people around me were doing. And so I grew up just believing, like I think a lot of people in my position believe, which is that the criminal justice system is really black and white. It's cut and dry. There are bad people. There are good people. The bad people get sent to prison because they do bad things to the good people. That's it. Clearly, I was wrong. And clearly, it's way more complicated than that. Clearly, the criminal justice system is this incredible institution and tool that human beings use for and against each other in good ways and bad ways all the time. And I, even just living alongside women who were guilty, who committed crimes and went to prison correctly, I learned that it's more complicated than that. And that the vast majority of the women that I was imprisoned with had lived lives of horrific injustice prior to being put through, prior to committing their own crimes and then being put through the legal process. Like, they were victims of, the vast majority of the women that I met in prison were victims of crimes before they ever committed a crime themselves. And so the idea that, like, here I was, like, just living my happy, safe life, thinking that only bad people go to prison, like, I had no idea. And I felt bad. I felt bad that I had judged other people like that so easily, so ignorantly. And so I sort of made it a point. I don't think I even consciously started doing this. I just sort of grew a new radar that was like hearing other people judge each other and being like, I bet they're wrong. I bet there's more to the story than this. I bet and there always is, because there's another human being on the other side of that story that you don't know, that is way more complicated. And the idea that there are all these psychopaths in prison, like, I never once met a psychopath in prison. Granted, I was in a women's prison and there weren't that many women, and there are psychopaths out there, but they are way more rare than people think. And the vast majority of people who are committing crimes are people who have complex stories, who are making mistakes.
Right.
And because of that, I feel like we should have a very different feeling about what we should do about that problem than we do, which is to righteously judge people and want to put them through immense suffering to solve our problems.
Yeah, that's so true. And we've heard it a couple of times that you went through a bad phase. And of course, anybody who is in your position will be going through that phase. You felt like you were suffocated. You wanted to end your life. And I don't know if you actually made the attempts, but I am glad you're still with us here.
Thank you.
But tell me, how did you even come back stronger and, did not want to pursue that anymore?
The reason why I considered suicide in my life was because of how trapped I felt in my own life. I felt trapped in a life not of my own making. I felt trapped in an identity that was not of my own making. And it felt like nothing I would ever do would ever come to define me more than this horrible accusation of something that I didn't do. And feeling that powerless, feeling like I was so disempowered from owning my own life was something that inspired me to imagine, well, you know what? Maybe I'm just not going to do this. And it was more of just an exercise in possibility, I think, for me. Like reminding myself that I wasn't actually trapped. Like there was an escape hatch. Mm-hmm. It looked like this, and it was a final and ultimate escape hatch, but there was an escape hatch. And for some reason, like really grappling with that gave me just enough relief to then think, okay, can I tackle this life head on? Can I make something out of it? Can I work and have dreams and have a career and have purpose, even in the face of the reality that I'm still probably going to die defined by this horrible thing that I've had nothing to do with? Can I feel purposeful in that, with that reality? And the answer was yes, because again, I felt like nothing was stopping me. Nothing could stop me from being my best self, regardless of the circumstances. And my best self was one that did not just shut up and disappear like the world was telling me to do, but stood up for things that I cared about, that I knew were right. And I started thinking that maybe I wasn't the only one, and maybe by having a conversation with somebody who had been written off as a human being, as another human being who had been written off, like maybe that would inspire people to just question for a moment whether or not their self-righteous judgments about people were earned. Mm-hmm. And that felt like something positive that I could do. Even if it never came to define me, it was something that I could do.
Yeah. Can you also share some insights into the Scarlet Reports and its purpose in shedding light on public shaming?
Yeah, so this is exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the Scarlet Letter Reports was my first, journalistic attempt to bring out these ideas. And it was me interviewing other women who had been vilified and dehumanized in the press. Because it's not just me. It hadn't just happened to me. Yes. I actually was one in a long history of women who were being vilified in the press. And I saw the same patterns happening and recurrent in these stories that we were telling about out of control women, sexually, vilified women. And I thought that by just having a simple conversation with someone and asking them to tell their story instead of having their story told for them was a powerful statement. And I'm really, really grateful that of all places, Vice and Facebook were going to give me that opportunity. It was surprising to me. But I teamed up with this incredible group of women, all women who are producing this series with me. And we interviewed back-to-back famous women, the Misha Bartons of the world, and also young women who were like me, completely anonymous, and went from a nobody to a villain. And some of them didn't make it. Like I interviewed a young woman who, she actually gave me this tattoo. No. She as a young girl, had been raped and left, in the snow, like completely just left to potentially die of exposure in the snow by her rapist, and then was vilified by everyone who didn't believe her. And she attempted to take her own life, didn't succeed, went on to become this incredible advocate, went on to become a tattoo artist, but then ultimately did take her own life because the vilification didn't stop and the people going after her didn't stop, and she couldn't take it anymore. So,
These are hard stories to hear.
Yeah, especially when
especially if you've met them in person and spent even a day with them or an hour with them.
Yeah.
And I think you may not be able to control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide and define not to be reduced by them.
Yeah. I think the thing that she forgot is that she does get to define who she is, like you said. It's really hard when the world is telling, like the whole world is telling you that you're a monster. You sort of start feeling like a crazy person to say, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
If you're like one voice in all of these voices, you start to think like, if there are just so many of them, they must be right. Like, how could so many people be wrong? You start to internalize a lot of that. And I think that uninternalizing those messages is one of the greatest challenges, because we're all intuitive, like we're all social creatures. We learn who we are through each other. And when the other social creatures of the world are exiling us and vilifying us, to stand up to that takes not just a lot of courage, but also a lot of like self-awareness. And that's very, very hard, especially for a young person who's still learning who they are. Mm-hmm. And she was young, and so was I. And so I understood her pain and her confusion and her fear, and ultimately her decision.
Amanda, how do you foster resilience and empowerment in others who have faced wrongful convictions or public shaming?
That's a great question, because I feel like I had to figure out how to how to have resilience for myself first before I could start advising anybody. And so it really was a process of figuring out for myself that, and really ingraining in myself that I had value, even if I didn't have voice, and that what I did mattered, even if in the grand scheme of things, my legacy might not reflect what mattered to me. And that's something that I think a lot of people who have been either wrongly convicted or just generally vilified, canceled, that's the same struggle, is that feeling that the story of your life does not reflect who you are. Mm-hmm. And how do you feel like you can do anything in the face of that? And I sort of found the answer to that myself just by putting it into practice, just by deciding, well, regardless of that, I'm going to keep doing what I think is right. I'm going to keep talking to people. I'm going to keep thinking about this problem of bias and of judgment, and sort of look at it from all these different directions, and ultimately write a lot about it and talk to a lot of people about it. And that turned into having some advice to give to people. I actually just posted today on Instagram. I don't know if you saw. Part of my ability to find resilience has been through meditation. I started a meditation practice, and it has been very, very transformative. Just the allowing yourself to sit with your own mind, to sit with your feelings, to not judge yourself for feeling bad about what happened to you. Yeah. You know, like just really accepting who you are, where you're at, knowing that you're imperfect, but that you're a process, and that you are a process that belongs to everyone else, and everyone else belongs to you. I think really embracing the idea that even if you feel isolated, you are not. Even if you feel singled out, you are a part of something bigger than yourself, which is all of this. Mm-hmm. And that you have, as a person who has been singled out, you have this extraordinary ability to stand up and say something.
I agree with the meditation part as well, because I started early this year, and I thought I finally found my voice back to where I belong. And until then, I just kept ignoring the fact that I needed meditation or I could actually even concentrate. And all of this is so untrue because once you put your heart and soul into something, I think everything else is just becomes easy, translucent, and transparent.
Yeah. Just allowing yourself to be quiet for a moment, to not be chasing, to not be grasping,
True.
to just let it be. Suddenly you become way more effective at interacting with the world. You're not chasing, you're not fumbling, you're not stumbling around. I feel like, a lot of people think that the only way they can get anything done is by doing everything all at once. And it's like, well, that's a great way to do a lot of things badly instead of doing the things you need to do effectively and really understanding what it is that you can do. I think we get trapped. I think meditation is really, really good at reminding us of how the world is, not how we think it should be, not how we wish it would be, not thinking that we could change the past or that the future needs to be a certain way for us to be okay, but just simply like allowing the present to be what it is so that you can be effectively in the present.
Absolutely. I think my another question for you was, once you are an eye candy with all the media attention, it's very hard to go back to normal. There is no new normal because it's always going to be part of your life. Tell us how you can empower other women and how you're doing it right now with women in similar situations as yours, whether they are public shamed, whether they are put on the site, whether they are criminally accused of a crime they have done or they have not done. But tell me a little more of what have you been doing to help these women?
So again, it goes back to that, like, okay, let's not try to interact with the world in the way that it's not. I am not an anonymous person. I'm recognized all the time. This is my life. Okay, now what? Well, I have the opportunity to talk to other women, talk to other people, and give them not just a platform to share their own stories, but also my own experience with learning how to tell a story. Like, not everyone who goes through a traumatic thing knows how to talk about it.
True.
I think that's one of the greatest challenges of going through a traumatic thing is like, you're trying to understand what it even means to yourself and who you are. Like, how do you go, what's the story from A to B? Like, who am I? Who was I? Who am I now? Where am I going? Like, these are all big problems that all of us face. And I think a lot of people feel misunderstood and overwhelmed because they don't quite know. They know they have something to say. They just don't know how to say it. And so I've gone on, since doing the Scarlet Letter reports, I've gone on to do podcasting, which has been incredible. I was never expecting to be a podcaster of all things, but it's kind of an ideal form. And I work alongside my husband, Christopher Robinson. We started out doing a podcast series called The Truth About True Crime, where I was very specifically addressing like criminal justice related stories. How are these stories mistold? I'm particularly thinking about this one whole series we did within the Truth About True Crime about the Preppy murder, which is about this young woman who was raped and murdered in Central Park in the 80s. And the person who did it got away with it because he said that they were having rough sex and that she died by accident while they were having rough sex. And the media had a field day with this. Is she into rough sex or not? And it was just scandalous enough that it sold papers and compelled people to think that this rapist, who was clearly was covered in all of her, like, she had scratched his face from trying to like defend herself. And they said it was just a sex game gone wrong.
Wow.
And it was absolutely horrendous. But that was how the media played a role in that case. And so I've used my own experience to shed light on other stories that are very similar. But I've since gone on to look in this new podcast that I've had. Actually, it's not new. I've had it for years now, called Labyrinths, where I interview people about the times that they felt lost. So it's not just, my experience is not just relatable to those who've gone through the criminal justice system, which itself is labyrinthine and very, very confusing and scary and overwhelming. But all of us in our lives are facing these moments when we don't know where to go. We're suddenly plunged into a situation that's overwhelming, that's out of our control. What do we do? And once we get to the other side, if we get to the other side, how do we process it? And that has been an incredibly rewarding experience because it means that I get to connect with people who are trapped in their own bodies because they're going through illnesses, that people who are, I had this wonderful series that we did where we interviewed all these women about infertility and how much of an existential crisis it was because they went into going into motherhood thinking that, now is the time I'm going to be a mother and I'm ready and I'm excited and here's my family, here's my dream, I have a vision, everything I thought that I had, I could take for granted.
Ready to be a mother.
And then I can't. Like who you are suddenly dissolves in front of your eyes and you're left with this big question mark and this long struggle that is deeply, deeply traumatizing to the body, but also doesn't have a guarantee that it's going to work out. And being able to draw those threads and make those emotional connections and psychological connections has been incredibly rewarding for me. And I hope really rewarding for the people I've interviewed because I've had a long time to just sit and think about the struggle and what it means to move through the struggle and become the person you are going to be regardless of the outcome.
No, I think that is so empowering. It's not just about infertility or, women who are put behind bars or women who are struggling with their own bodies, body shaming, fat shaming. There is like million other things that women has to go through. And a lot of time it becomes a stigma. And it's very hard to remove that because women start accepting that. And very few get out of that from their mental aspect. Because eventually we hear stories about, hey, there is mental health awareness required. But did it start very young or did it start late?
Right.
So I'm so glad that you're sharing about what you're doing to make this world a better place.
Oh, thanks.
I wish the word better was used to help you when you were going through the toughest times and you could find better people and the right people and the righteous people, but you did not. But what you are doing right now is being righteous to these men and women who are going through tragic in their lives. And thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to end this segment by saying, when life tries to break you, let it be the spark that ignites your inner strength.
Yeah.
Amanda, looking back, is there anything you would have done differently to avoid the series of events that occurred in your life?
Oh, if only one could go back and do things differently. I get asked that question a bit, and I think I've resisted that question in the past because I've always been like, well, I couldn't have done anything different. I didn't know any different. But I think what people are asking when they're asking that question is, how do we all learn from your experience? Like, what can be done? And, there are things that I could have done. Like I could have insisted that I have an attorney with me before I talk to police, or
first time.
Or I could have studied abroad somewhere else. Like there are all these things that could have been done differently. The thing I really would love for people to consider when that kind of question comes up, though, is how little what I did mattered in those days leading up to my arrest. Like how much all of that was already entirely out of my control. And instead ask the question, well, who did have control over that situation and what could they have done differently? And, one of those big things that I try to speak about today especially when I talk about criminal justice reform, is the way that we interrogate people, the way that police are allowed to interrogate people, especially young people. There's actually right now in Washington State, they're trying to pass a new law. The Washington Innocence Project is trying to pass a new law that forbids law enforcement from lying to juveniles while they're interrogating them. Now, to be clear, this means that right now, today, police are allowed to lie to you, no matter who you are. And they can lie to your face and tell you things like, we have your fingerprints on the murder weapon. You better confess right now. Like,
Is that right?
It's absolutely legal for police to do this. It's not intuitive. It's not common sense, but it is legal. And what the Innocence Project here in Washington State is attempting to do is to simply make it illegal to not lie to children and to not manipulate and gaslight children by lying to them in the interrogation room. I wish that I hadn't been lied to when I was interrogated, that I had not been told that I was a witness or that I didn't have a right to an attorney or like all of these things. Like I was blatantly lied to.
Did you even know about having a right to attorney?
I mean, you sort of hear that in TV shows. Like, aren't you supposed to have an attorney or something like that? But like, again, that's if you're accused of a crime, and no one had accused me of a crime yet. Absolutely. We all are naive and ignorant. And I think that the thing that I would love to see more, first of all, in public education is more education around like what your rights are in relation to the legal system. But I would also like it for the legal system to be more transparent. I would like interrogations to be videotaped. I would like you to always have the right to an attorney and that it be automatically provided to you, not for you to beg for it and request for it and then to have it be denied to you because of some loophole that they say, well, you're not a suspect, so you don't have a right to it. You're just a witness. Like there are many, many loopholes that we have baked into the system that make really innocent people vulnerable to manipulation and gaslighting. And those are the kinds of things that I would love to see done differently, so something like what happened to me doesn't happen again in the future. I also have regrets about things that haven't happened yet. Like one thing that would still really, really mean a lot to me is to visit Meredith's grave. And I regret not having done that yet. Yeah, I've not wanted to go without her family's blessing because ultimately she belongs to them first. Mm-hmm. And it is my hope that one day I will receive that blessing. And I would very much regret if I never had that chance. I totally sympathize with you on that. If I would have lost a friend, that would be the first place where I would have liked to be. And so does that mean you have no touch and no contact with her family? I don't. Not yet. I'm still hoping. And I hope that turns into a reality for you so you can have that little chapter of your life covered and let her also go in peace from your heart. Because a lot of times, so much has happened that I don't think she's even found the peace that she should have, even in that grave. Yeah. She had a brutal death and so much happened, but there was no peace. Yeah. She also lost her parents. Yeah. And, it's just a tragic ending for so many around her. Yeah. I agree. There was these 3 kisses that you did to Raphael that went viral. I don't think it went more viral than COVID as well. That's a great joke. It was in every newspaper, every media, every tabloid. When I looked at as just a woman or just somebody who lost somebody, I think for me it was comforting. And whether it was lips or it was cheeks, I guess it made a huge deal because it was on the lips. And do you reflect back on that? Whether you would have not done and it would have a completely different portrayal of your character assassination, or it didn't matter? I don't think it ultimately mattered. I think that the 3-second clip that's just been echoed throughout and put in slow motion and like put on repeat in the media for the years. I regret that that's the 3-second clip of my life that most people remember when they think of me. But at the same time, that was an intimate moment between a young man and a young woman who were very confused and scared. And I think Raffaele did the only thing he could think of to do, which was to just comfort me the way that he knew how, by giving me kisses and hugs. And I don't regret that he chose to be affectionate towards me in that moment of crisis. And I am sad that it was so mischaracterized the world over, that gesture of tenderness towards me in a moment when I was in need. So
I agree. I think it was just taken to a level where it was just unjustified.
Yeah.
Amanda, I'm so glad that you were able to spend so much time with us today, and I hope that so many people have got inspired by watching you and hearing your story. It's never enough to hear you, because what you have gone through is also never enough. As we are ending the show, I have a very special segment, and it's called the Burning Questions.
Excellent.
Everybody knows Amanda Knox, but let's find something else. Amanda, tell us the secret nobody knows about you. And I'm repeating this question. Tell us the secret nobody knows about you.
Okay, I'm going to try to think of one that isn't lame, because they're like, well, one is that I'm terrible at keeping secrets. I'm kind of an open book, but that nobody knows about me. I'm really, really hard on myself. Like really hard on myself. Like I can be a jerk to myself sometimes. And I'm not sure if that's because I'm still sort of unlearning the hatred that was directed towards me. But sometimes I'm afraid if I'm too kind to myself, because I'm afraid that will make me vulnerable, that that something will happen when I'm in a space of not being afraid of people, that I'll be judged and I'm afraid of judgment to this day. That's maybe something that is very not on brand for me, because I sort of work to not be afraid of that kind of thing and to really call that into question. But the reality is, like, the focus of my career and a lot of my work is things that scare me. And so maybe that's the dark secret at the heart of it all.
We always talk about the darkest moments of your life, but tell me about an enlightening moment while you were in prison. It could be a happy moment.
Yeah, there were happy moments. I'll tell you a happy moment. So in the women's prison, there was a whole section of the prison where women with young children were allowed to live. And so women who had young children up to age 3, I think they were allowed to live with them. And then they were taken away, which itself was this whole tragedy. But what that meant was that there were toddlers in the prison.
Oh.
And they were kept separate from those of us who were in general population. But there was that period of time where I was segregated from everyone else. There was like 8 months that I was kept in isolation. And during those 8 months, I was brought to a special little spot in the prison for my outside time. I wasn't allowed to go out where everyone else did yard time. I was like in a little courtyard that was very small. It was right outside the chapel. But what it did was it had windows into the hallways. And every morning, the nuns who volunteered at the prison would take the toddlers out for a walk. They would just walk around, the prison facility, and they would walk by my windows. And every morning they would stop to say hi to me. and we couldn't talk to each other. Like there was a window and bars between us, but like it was just communicating like this. And it got to the point where I was like doing funny dances for them. I was just trying to make them smile. And I looked forward to that every morning. It really made my day. And actually, one time, I was called down. So this is, after several months of this, or just regular seeing these toddlers walk by. I was brought down to go sign some court documents, and one of the mothers just happened to be in the same hallway signing her court documents at the same time. And her daughter, who had seen me every day for like months, saw me come into the hallway and ran up to me and hugged me.
Oh, that's so
because
cute.
she just knew me. She said, "Eccola," which means there she is, and ran up to me and hugged me. And I was just like, oh, like the one, like that, it was really what I needed, because like here was this like innocent young person who was not judging me, who just saw me for who I was, the like funny person who said hi to her every morning. And it was incredible.
That is so touching.
Yeah.
Are you in touch with any one of the person who's been acquitted?
Who was in prison?
Yeah.
I'm in touch with one woman who I was imprisoned with, but she was not one of the mothers. She was one of my cellmates. So I see her every Thanksgiving.
Oh.
Actually, it's coming up.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
We didn't know about that. Maybe that was the secret.
That was the secret. Yeah. I see one of my cellmates every Thanksgiving. There you go. Secret done. Okay.
Let's ask you one last question before you leave.
Okay.
I think we know a little bit about you and Christopher's story, that you dated for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we really know how you met.
It's a fun story. It wasn't on Tinder, I'll tell you that. So I met him at a time in my life where I was still kind of hiding. I was still working in the bookstore. But I had been writing for a local newspaper under a pseudonym. So I started journalism not under my own name, because I was afraid of using my own name. And I was doing a lot of arts correspondence. So I was, reviewing plays and interviewing local artists and things like that. And he was a local writer who had just written, his debut novel was coming out. And so I was given an advance copy, and I was asked to review it for the paper. And I did. I gave him a rave review. The book was called War of the Encyclopedists, in case anyone wants a good book to read, or a present. And I wrote this rave review. I submitted it to the paper, and that was going to be the end of it. I was never planning on meeting him, except the next day after I submitted my, review, I walked out of my house and I saw a poster for a book reading for this exact book that I had just read at my local bookstore that very night. And I thought, well, that's, serendipitous. And this was a time period where I never went out in public. I did not go to public events. I did not, I never went to a bar. I never went to karaoke. I never did book readings. I just did not go out in public. And I thought, you know what? Maybe a book reading is timid enough. And, hopefully people won't recognize me. Well, of course, I walk in and people recognize me and are whispering. And so I just sort of try to find a side seat. And I watched this, these two best friends who wrote a book together talk about their book and read from their book. And I just thought it was super charming. And so afterwards, I asked them for an interview for the paper. And so I interviewed them, and that interview was a ton of fun. I interviewed them about the book, but then we started talking about Star Trek, and we started talking about Scotch, and just having a really fun time. And at the end of it, Chris shook my hand and said, "We should be friends." And just a throwaway comment like that. But I don't think he realized how much it meant to me. I had this was a moment in my life where I had just been fully acquitted. I was no longer being hunted down by the police, but I was no longer facing extradition. And I thought, oh my God, can I actually make friends with people in the world like a normal person now? Because here was this person who was like, hey, I would love to be your friend. And he didn't follow the case. It was just because we liked the same kinds of things, poetry and books. And he became one of my first friends after everything was over. And, 9 months later, we started dating. And now, how many years later? Some odd years later, should know this. We're married and we have 2 kids.
Right
Yeah, I have mommy brain right now. You'll have to forgive me. Maths are not my thing right now. But we have it's cool because it's not usual that you hear stories of people meeting each other in the world like real people. But I was not in a place where I thought at the time that I was meeting him that I would never be able to like meet people in the real world and make friends with people. I thought I was sort of like limited to all the people who knew me from before prison, like my friends from, middle school and high school. And that wasn't the case. So
thank you for enlightening us with the story. And I'm sure everybody who's watching is also having fun and curious about how you met the love of your life.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming to the show. Women in the Making is a show and a platform for women to get inspired, be encouraged, speak for themselves, walk on the path of success, walk and find your freedom, find your voice, anything that you can do to support yourself and be that change in the society. So thank you for coming and taking your motherhood time and being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for consistently staying with me in this journey. You have showered Women in the Making with so much love and words of encouragement. I have nothing more than just gratitude. Throughout history, strong women have used their persistence as a catalyst for tangible change in the communities, and so has Amanda. I am so glad today you all get to witness that. Join us again next week for yet another inspirational episode. Thank you and goodbye.